Okay, good morning, Mr. Reed coming at you live. Um, Going to be talking quickly about a concept called two concepts called black humor and magic realism today. They are both postmodern techniques. The reason why we're talking about this and we're rolling this out today is because for part three of your um, literature circle presentations, one of the questions talks a little bit about how literary techniques during the time in which your texts were published represent the context of the composition itself, right? So obviously we've been looking at things like structural devices. We've been looking like fragmentation, or maybe it's stylistic choices like metafiction, or maybe it's for contextual use like factualism or verisimilitude. And black humor and magic realism are a continuation of that, right? They can be used for a wide variety of different reasons, but the main purpose is to reveal some sort of commentary about something like social or cultural or political norms. All right. So go ahead and click postmodern techniques here. All right, we're going to start with black humor real quickly. Black humor is making fun of something that is culturally or politically taboo. It can be cringeworthy. It can make us feel a little bit uncomfortable. That's normal. But again, the idea behind the use of black humor in your text is to critique society or class or religion or cultural norms or politics. So I've given some examples here just from cinema. You have Jojo Rabbit, which is, this particular scene is about laughing at a near-death experience and also the comedical role of Hitler. And then the second is from Parasite, the Peach scene, which is a class commentary, but it's also in this particular scene where exploring the humor of physical health and also the misfortune of a maid who works in a well-to-do family's household. In your particular text, black humor can be used for a couple different reasons. For, let's say, Purple Hibiscus, these are just things that are kind of off the top of my head. But the banter between Amaka and Obiero could be seen as social or political commentary. They kind of have this sick sense of humor, and they're very pointed in their criticism. And also, when in the Sympathizer, when the doctor's talking about how relativism is the only anecdote for war, again, that could be commentary. In Illustrato, it could be something that's more situational. So, for example, right after the gas station explosion, and you have those guys who are sitting out in the backyard and they're on drugs, and the head is rolling around, and then they have to go and get the help of the household to go and clean it up. We could see that as black humor. It could be more due to the development of characterization. So I think of Amaka and Obiera, that's a good example, but also in Handmaid's Tale, Offred's own sense of humor is a little bit twisted. It's an odd sense of humor. Or you maybe want to think about in Human Acts, the bodyguard's remarks about genocide and how he's sort of laughing at that unironically. That could be actually contextual or characterization, or it could be social political commentary, those three things. It could be more contextual, right? So looking at not just the time and place, but also the author themselves, right? So if we're talking about Part-Time Indian, some of the dark jokes that are shared between Rowdy and Junior really are kind of a commentary. I mean, if we're using a post-structuralist commentary, we could look at this and see that this is sort of reflective of what Sherman Alexie thinks, his own worldview points, and also what he thinks is humorous. In which case, we could maybe talk a little bit about sort of the inappropriate or inaccurate representations of mental illness or poverty in his novel, and how he portrays them. I think off the top of my head, I believe that's all of the text that we've covered there. So that's black humor. Scrolling on up, so this document is broken down into a couple different sections. We have magic realism, which I'll talk about in a second, but similar to when I was rolling out some artwork focusing on transformation and pastiche and fragmentation, this document is supposed to serve the same purpose. Basically, show you examples of what magic realism looks like in different artwork. And I've provided some descriptions for you here, so feel free to read these. Actually, really interesting pieces of artwork from over the course of the 19th century. Sorry, the 20th century. Magic realism. I've provided a link here, but I've given you just a couple of a potpourri of sorts of commentary about that. The first thing, probably the most important thing to know, is that when you hear the word magic realism, it's not magic, right? This is not fantasy. Remember that the second word is realism, right? It's in ground, it's concrete, it's something that we can hold. And the idea behind magic realism is that the character embraces that you have something like factionalism where you're incorporating actual historical events. But when you have magic realism, the character is in the real world, and there are certain supernatural things that may take place, but they're accepted. They're just a part of the natural world, right? And the last quote here, again, talking about how we can make connections to our part 3 question about context. As a genre, magic realism has been used to critique politics from anti-imperialist, Marxist, feminist, and a combination of all three perspectives. So aside from just the use of maybe imagery or the way it's being structured, like bricolage or temporal distortion, or it being used as a stylistic technique, it is a form of commentary, right? So just kind of name a couple things off the top of my head here. Again, you think about some of the religious and spiritual imagery that's used in Purple Hibiscus, and think about why Adichie chooses to do this. The sighting, for example, when they go, the characters go to see that religious epiphany. What's the point of that? You could maybe even talk about intertextuality with Things Fall Apart. Illustrato, all of the lucid dreams that Crispin, Miguel have in that text. What is the significance of chopping that up between the real Miguel and his sort of going about day-to-day activities versus, these odd dreams that sort of, are provided before or after those particular events. Or you think about Dong Ho as a character, there's that I believe it's chapter 2 when all the bodies are being piled up on top of him, and then he watches the match being lit and the gasoline's being poured. It's very almost supernatural. And again, why is this being used? What type of commentary is being done here? So obviously, again, we could look at both magic realism and black humor from a structuralist or a stylistic point of view. It might tell us a little bit about the time period, but it's also commentary. All right. Last couple things, and then I'm finished here. So at the bottom here, just a quick meet up with your group. You can do this through Zoom or Google Classroom. Google Hangout. Have a quick conversation. Do a little bit of research about the use and application of both magic realism and black humor. See how it works into your text. Do a little documentation. Share ideas. All right. This is kind of a breakdown of the due dates for our presentation and what that looks like. Remember, individual annotated bibliography is due for next week in Turnitin.com. I have a quick reading on intertextuality I'd like you to go ahead and check out because we're going to be making some connections to other non-literary texts, especially when it comes to the poetry, which case in point, that's right here. And then just some frequently asked questions I've been getting for the presentation itself. And that's about it. So please feel free to shoot me an email, or if you want to talk on Zoom or Google Hangout, I am here during your class period. Feel free to ask. Have a wonderful day.